Thank you for that great introduction. Remind me to have my agent send you an honorarium afterwards. It's always great to be here, particularly times like this. It's such a zchus to be in a room with a bunch of guys who are finally going to give Gen Z a good reputation. Why am I here? Well, I've lived in Golos for too long. Close to 40 years in Los Angeles, and I worked for the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which was at the time the single largest Jewish membership organization in North America, perhaps the world. During a good part of that time, I did work on Israel advocacy, particularly with non-Jewish communities, but anti-Semitism was always on the radar. Back then you needed radar. Today you don't need radar. You need blinders not to see it. And that is something that has changed. That's my calling card. That's what I'm doing here. During those years I met not only a lot of nice people, but every single kind of anti-Semite you could imagine. So I have, unfortunately, some experience in knowing what moves those critters. Let's start off with, like rabbis always do, with a story. It's about Johnny. Johnny is sleeping late on a weekday morning and not responding to the alarm. Finally, his mother comes and tries stirring him. Johnny, it's time to get up. Johnny, you've got to get up and go to school. Johnny, you've got to go to school. But I hate school. Everybody there laughs at me. Everybody makes fun of me. Nobody likes me. Johnny, you're 47 years old and you're the principal. Johnny would probably do well to find out why everybody hates him. And we're going to be doing a little bit of that today. 2 years ago, I stood here trying to explain why people hate us. And you would think that all I had to do is dust off my notes and maybe throw in something contemporary about some really, really critical issue like the Dodgers winning the World Series. And that's all I would have to do. But no way. No way. What we've seen in the last 2 years has been just so painful, and it includes new realizations of what we've learned about anti-Semitism. What we've learned is best expressed in a very oft-quoted couple of lines of verse by T.S. Eliot. And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. You've heard the lines before. It's worthwhile bookmarking. I don't know how many times I've been able to use that line. It's really great. It means that sometimes you look and you spend years or decades and sometimes centuries looking for answers that were there right from the beginning. So specifically, where were we at the beginning and we've arrived now for the first time? It's with my Rabbeim in high school. Now, when I went to high school, it was a long time ago. As a matter of fact, we even had a parking lot for pterodactyls. But it wasn't all that different, except that my Rabbeim were, for a large part, either Holocaust survivors or kind of first-generation Americans who were in a very, very small group at the time. They were Bnei Yeshiva who had graduated when it was very unpopular to do so. And they used to tell us things that us sophisticated Americans thought was very simplistic. We were sophisticated. We weren't going to, we loved our Rabbeim, but they were greeners, transplants from Europe. We thought, and we continued to think for decades later, that we had a more sophisticated way of viewing world history. We weren't completely wrong. We did have, and there was some truth to what we came up with. But they understood more than we gave them credit for. When it came to anti-Semitism, they didn't have any spekus. They didn't have any doubts. To them it was simple. Goyim hate us. Full stop. Nothing more had to be said. We were skeptical about that. First of all, we didn't want to believe it. We were in this great American dream we all wanted to be part of, wanted to be from Jews, but still America was the golden Medina, especially after the Holocaust. Nobody wanted to believe that it could happen again. So we looked for explanations in history. Okay, what does history say about anti-Semitism? Very quickly, let's run through the different kinds of anti-Semitism that history has known. First of all, there's ancient history. Anti-Semitism goes back a long time. It goes back at least to the 4th century BCE. When I say it goes back, it means that's the first time we had it recorded. The first time something is recorded doesn't mean it's the first time people thought of it. And Hercateus of Abdera said that Moses secluded followers from other men and led a revolution. A Manetho, an Egyptian priest, leave it to the Egyptians, in Hellenic times said Moshe was a renegade priest, led a revolt of outcasts and misfits. They didn't like Jews. For the most part of history that we sort of historically remember, anti-Semitism was religious. We were a threat. We denied the fundamentals of the other monotheistic religions with which we interacted. In Christianity, 3 elements arose that are with us to this day, that spelled life and death for Jews for century after century, and have never disappeared, and they're actually making a comeback. We'll come to that in the course of this little presentation. What were the 3? The first was replacement theology, sometimes called supersessionism, first introduced by Ignatius, a 2nd century bishop in Antioch. The idea is that, the church made a little bit of a mistake in the 3rd century, 3rd or 4th, I don't remember. I wasn't around back then, but they made a mistake. They had chilukei deis. They had a big machlokas as to whether the Old Testament was something they should discard or they should value. And the Hashkacha had it that they made the wrong decision for them. They decided that, it's also holy, we're going to keep it, but that presented them with a major problem. The Old Testament is still valid. What about all those promises to the Jews? What about all those promises to the Jews? And God pledging that He's never going to abandon the Jews. Like, what do you do with them? Simple. You say, they're not the Jews anymore. We're the Jews. So that is called replacement theology. And that it's coming back supercharged after we thought it had been killed off in parts of the Christian world. Justin introduced the charge of collective guilt for deicide. We killed their God. I have a recollection of a friend who once got surrounded by a group of not so friendly people who were very interested in Judaism because their interest was that they wanted to beat him up. And he said, what do I do? And he said, you killed our God. So he knew he had to come. There's no way getting any way out of it. He said, no, I didn't. No, we didn't. He said, you killed our God. He said, I'll prove it. How are you going to prove it? He said, us Jews, when we kill somebody, he stays dead. A third element was introduced by John Chrysostom in the 4th century. He was really the first to see to it that not only would Judaism be rejected as a belief system, but that Jews themselves would be reviled as a people. He described Jews as the most miserable of all men, lustful, rapacious, greedy, perfidious bandits, inveterate murderers, destroyers, men possessed by the devil. Debauchery and drunkenness have given them the manners of the pig and the lusty goat. Pests of the universe, they have surpassed the ferocity of wild beasts, for they murder their offspring. Okay, now where did that come from? The church had a problem. There were a lot of people in early Christianity who didn't give up Judaism. Some of them were Jews, most of them were not, but they liked Judaism. Judaism had a lot of stuff that was important to people at the time. The idea of all people being judged by a single code, all men being equal under the law. The idea that eternal life was something reserved for everybody who could want it. So there were people who were Judaizers within the church, and they struggled with it for a long time. So a lot of the stuff of the church fathers was because we were competition. It wasn't just that we believed it differently, it's that people were still practicing Judaism, and that was something they had to put a stop to. So the way to do it was to distance themselves as much as they could. The next major shift or change in anti-Semitism was that Jews were a financial threat. If you don't know the story about Menashe ben Yisrael and how he convinced Cromwell, he convinced Cromwell to let the Jews back into England. And it's a fascinating story, which I'm not going to tell now. But he was almost successful. What prevented the Jews from being let back into England at that time? The shopkeepers in London. They didn't want the competition. So Jews throughout history, when Jews were successful, whatever level of success they had, there were people around who were jealous, and there were always noblemen who figured one way to give the masses free buses when you have no economic basis for it is to basically steal the money of Jews. So Jews went through, in many countries, they went through cycles of being allowed to live under the protection of the local government for a while, and then when the rulers needed money, they just said, okay, Jews, you're all out, and leave all your possessions here. So the jealousy for Jewish success was a factor. The next really radical change came in modern times. This is racial anti-Semitism, whereas up until now it had been primarily either religious or just the idea that Jews are different. Now it became racial. Voltaire, who you may have some regard for otherwise, was a gewaldig anti-Christian. He really hated Judaism because it gave the world Christianity. Nietzsche was the same way. It wasn't Jews and Judaism they hated so much. It was the fact that their religion emerged from Judaism, and if Judaism had not evolved, they wouldn't have that problem. I don't know if you remember the Christopher Hitchens. One of the what did they call them? The Great Four, the something Four. The Four Horsemen. Right, so Christopher Hitchens, who never found out that he was Jewish, but he used to claim that the single day of universal mourning around the world should be Hanukkah. Why Hanukkah? Because if the Maccabim had lost, the Jews would have been suppressed as a culture. Greek enlightenment would have taken over the whole known world, and Christianity never would have come into being. So Voltaire introduced racial anti-Semitism. He couldn't care less about Judaism because he couldn't care less about Christianity. But Jews were different. Voltaire wrote that the Jews have never contributed anything to society. They have no scientists, they have no men of letters, they have no philosophers, they have no artists or musicians, they have nothing. And why? Because that's in their genes, which hadn't been discovered yet. But this was a racial thing. And that, of course, is one of the foundations of Hitler and the Holocaust. The idea of the purity of the Aryan race as opposed to the lowest race, which is that of Judaism. Then in very, very modern times, we get anti-Zionism, where Zionism has become a replacement for Judaism. And when you can't say, I hate Jews, you say, I hate Zionists. And most people are willing to recognize, most reasonable people recognize. And, of course, the whatever it is, definition of Judaism, which Mamdini pledges he's going to get rid of, recognizes that equating Zionism with Jews and Judaism is a form of anti-Semitism, but Mamdini is going to get rid of that. And you'll have, like when you get on your Free City bus, you'll get a little piece of paper explaining that you're allowed to hate Jews for being Zionists again. And today we have a couple of interesting variations on the theme. You have woke intersectionality. It's a relatively new phenomenon, and it's a product just of the left. It comes from the perception that Jews are white oppressor colonialists. Why are they white oppressor colonialists? Why do they not notice that in Israel today, white Jews are actually the minority of the population? Because whiteness doesn't have anything to do really with melanin. It has to do with how successful you are. If you're successful, you could only be successful on the backs of other people. That makes you a colonialist. And there we are. But let's not negate the contribution from the right. And this is something that this has hit in the solar plexus. October 7th was October 7th. October 8th was the wake-up call or the big surprise for Jews in Golos. But beyond October 8th, in the 2 years since then, the explosion of anti-Semitism around the world has taken on different forms. One form that we did not expect was that the evangelical right, which we depended on for friendship and for more than friendship, for so many years, a lot of us were aware that it was not going to last into the next generation because there's always a problem of generational transmission, and that the evangelical right, which loved Jews and loved Judaism, and no, it's not because they want us all here in Israel so that Armageddon can happen like it's supposed to and the second coming can happen. There are people who believe that, but it was not even on the list of top 10 reasons why they supported us. It all came from, if you got to know, from the Bible, from that mistake that Christians made in the 3rd century. Because people who read the Bible said that you can't buy this supersession stuff. It's just not true. I remember for a number of years sitting with every evangelical thinker that I came across, and I asked them, but what do you guys do about supersessionism? It's just so much a part of Christianity. And I never got a satisfactory answer. It was the elephant in the room. Till one day in Dallas, Texas, I meet this itinerant black preacher. He didn't have a shtetl. He went from city to city, speaking several times every week in different cities. He was a great guy. So when I asked him the question at Starbucks, he leans across the table and he said, "Those folks have never read the Bible. If you really read it, with a half an objective mind, you come to the conclusion that God has a covenant with the Jews. He won't abandon them, even in times that they're not faithful to the terms of the covenant. I have an Anglican friend who wrote a book on Christian Zionism. He wrote 2 or 3 actually, but one of the things that he includes is this great line I've used again and again and again. You can challenge any believing Christian. How do you know that God keeps His word? How do you know? I mean, you'd like to believe it. He's God after all. But do you have any evidence for it? Furthermore, do you have any evidence that God keeps His word even to those people who are undeserving? And the answer is, yeah, the Jews. It's right there in the Bible again and again and again. God doesn't only stick with them when they're behaving. He sticks with them when they're misbehaving. But in the last months, years, but really in the last months, we have seen through the efforts of people like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owen, Yimach Shemam, that they have made incredible inroads into young evangelicals, and they're preaching against supersessionism. That, come on, who are these Christian Zionists? We know that Jews don't have a part in this. And to uneducated young evangelicals who don't read the Bible, they don't read anything else either, but there aren't too many TikToks of scripture around, so they are fertile ground for breeding anti-Semitism, and it's been happening at a beyond alarming rate. As a consequence of October 7th, we've seen, which none of us believed. I mean, we saw the crowds in the capitals, and we thought, yeah, so they're a bunch of mixed up people, or who just repeat what they've heard from others, and they're the consequence of 3 generations of brainwashing on campus. But the extent when you get like an insignificant, meaningless country like Ireland making its most important contribution to world politics by taking the most anti-Israel position of any country in the world, like, what's going on? What's going on? When you find the guy in Germany is still one of the safest places for Jews today, outside of where we are, Lahavdil. But a guy put up a sign in his, I don't remember, it was a restaurant or a hotel, there's no Jews allowed. And when he was interviewed, he may get into trouble in Germany, you can't do that, but he said, it's nothing personal. I just hate Jews. So he said, nothing personal, I just hate Jews. The bottom line is that what we've seen is not just an explosion of anti-Semitism, but the mainstreaming. This is important. We have seen in the last 2 years the mainstreaming of anti-Semitic speech and attitudes. Where does it all come from? You've heard all the theories. The jealousy, people are jealous of Jews. The biggest one is otherness. People always need scapegoats, and Jews are the perpetual others. They never fit in. They don't have a country. They haven't had one in 2,000 years, so they don't look like, talk like anybody else out there, so they were always convenient to be scapegoats. And most societies require scapegoats. Try to think of what America would look like without people to beat on. Where would social media go? One of the more insightful ideas of the reasons of anti-Semitism. By reason, I mean here, again, I told you before, I'm siding with my Rabbeim, who said, you don't have to look for any reasons. But I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Saying that there's a bottom line reason that my Rabbeim pushed, which I think is what we have learned in the last couple of years, that they don't really need any reason to hate us. There is something just built into the world that they don't go for us. That doesn't preclude the idea that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this as a reality, a cultural reality for Western civilization, that he didn't use certain mechanisms, and that there are certain cultural truths that are Hashem's vehicle for this. So it still pays to talk about different sources of anti-Semitism. But when you look at all of them, none of them explain the contradictions, the self-defeating irrationality. I started saying that one, which I don't want to forget, is that Jews have been the moral conscience of the world. And we're going to come back to that because that one still has a heck of a lot of validity. But this pretty much leaves us where my Rabbeim were. Non-Jews hate us. Like Chazal say, Lama Nikra Shemo Sinai. Why was Har Sinai called Sinai? Mikan Yarda Sina La'olam. Okay, it's spelled slightly different. That doesn't always preclude making the drasha, but that's the drasha. Very, very powerful words. Why is Sinai called Sinai? Because from there, from Har Sinai, hatred of Jews descended to the world. Now, why Sinai? Why not Avram? Why Sinai? Because Sinai created a Jewish message, not only to Jews, but to the world, which had implications for everybody else. We're going to come back to this. Chazal also say, Esav sonei liYaakov. Esav hates Yaakov. Now this is not one of my favorite sources, even though it's quoted very often, because the Gemara says it's not really true. It's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah, and Daf Yud Amud Beis, where Rebbe, Yehuda Nasi, the publisher of the Mishnah, who was good friends with his Roman sponsor, we're not sure exactly his identity, Marcus Aurelius Severus, something or other, but he was a powerful guy in Rome, and he was very taken in by Rebbe, and he asked Rebbe, am I going to Olam Haba? And Rebbe said, yes. So he said, you're just playing up to me. You're just trying to make me feel good. I'll prove to you I'm not going to Olam Haba. And he cites a pasuk about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates Esav. What was Rebbe's response to him? He said, yeah, you got a good point. Why don't you consider converting? It's not what he said. He said that pasuk is only talking about non-Jews who are osim masa Esav. It's not a birth thing. It's not that you're part of the culture of Edom, so that precludes you being a Ben Olam Haba. You're Esav when you act like Esav. You, Antoninus, don't act like Esav, and there's no reason for you not to go to Olam Haba. Rav Henkin, who was the other great Adam Gadol Posek in Manhattan back in the old days, when Rav Moshe Zatzal had questions that he knew his answers would not be too popular with his interlocutors on certain issues, he sent them to Rav Henkin. He didn't send them to the local Orthodox rabbi. He sent them to Rav Henkin because he was a gadol and he was supposed to take in his own right. Rav Henkin argued strongly against the propagation of this idea. Esav, Sonling, Yaakov, all Goyim hate us. Today I'm not so sure. No, it's not all Goyim. That's extremely important to know. There was an Antoninus, and there are tens of millions of such people today. We still do have friends. That's one of the most important things to remember about anti-Semitism. Don't give up the struggle. If the world is turning, you see that we're losing young evangelicals, so don't give up on the 40 million that are still there who are our supporters. So they'll be gone, half of them in 10 years. We'll still have a few million for the next 20 years. We don't make binary decisions like that. Don't make a binary decision that all non-Jews hate us, and lurking behind every non-Jewish face is an anti-Semite. It's just not true. It's just not true. But my Rabbeim was still right. From far more people than we want to believe, it's simply a question that hatred of Jews is out there. It can't be explained. We assume that it's something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put in the Bria to keep us in line. Another important point, anti-Semitism. Don't ever fall into the depression that this is it. What an ugly world it is for Jews. Our belief is, and that's one of the reasons why they hate us, is that we believe, not pray for a better day, not think that there may be a time of redemption. We know that Mashiach will come and there will be a redeemed world, and the people who hate us today, or their descendants, are not going to hate us anymore. That's important to keep in mind. On the other hand, one way or another, in the meantime, it'll be there. Amos Oz said it very well. Not exactly a very big fan of halachic Judaism, but there's a line in his memoir of A Tale of Love and Darkness. Quote, "When my father was a young man in Vilna, every wall in Europe said, 'Jews, go home to Palestine.' 50 years later, when he went back to Europe on a visit, the walls all screamed, 'Jews, get out of Palestine.'" And some say that he himself, or somebody close to him, added this addendum, which was, "I'm beginning to think that it is not where I live that bothers them, but that I live." So we get to the end, sort of. What are the takeaways? So here, I always keep in mind the advice of the great Gaon of the 20th century, Yogi Berra, who said, "I hate making predictions, especially about the future." There are things that we can tentatively predict, but they're all tentative. First one is not a prediction, but it's also so important to understand when you see just 60%, some poll, of New York City voters are going to vote for Mamdini today. 60%? I don't believe it. But there's so many of those people out there. Between Jewish Voice for Peace and not in our lifetime and not in our name, and the people who shut down the bridges in Manhattan in their rallies for Hamas, there are a lot of Jews among that number. This is nothing new, Rabbosai. This has been a reaction to anti-Semitism since it began. There were some Jews who looked at the hatred of Jews and say, 7 billion Goyim can't be all wrong. There must be reasons. There are reasons why they hate Jews. And they start to believe them. There are subtle psychological reasons why they would want to believe them, but this is not a new phenomenon. We have to be mispalel for them. We have to support those efforts that are going on. I'm not sure if you know about them, but the last 2 years have presented the single greatest opportunity for kiruv of people who are very distant from Yiddishkeit since June 1967. My daughter-in-law is, I don't know what title it gave her. It's not COO, but it's sort of like COO of NCSY. She tells me about how NCSY chapters in places like Montana are just overwhelming the request lines at NCSY because high school students who hardly know they're Jewish are clamoring for some Jewish content. You have that reaction, and we have to that has to be part of our reaction to anti-Semitism. But don't be surprised that the opposite is there as well. Don't try to cure it. It's not going to go away. But don't treat it as all having the same cause. So therefore, and here I'm sure lots of people won't agree with me, but do try to erase stereotypes. There are lots of people who are in the middle, or who go along with the stuff that they hear, but really have no direct experience with Jews or Judaism, and when they meet them, it makes all the difference in the world. If there are stereotypes about what Jews are, how they act, you have to counter them. It is imperative today, I would not have said this 2 years ago, that as much as possible in our interaction, any place, on campus, in the business world, that we try to speak to non-Jews one by one and counter. We're not going to convert the world. Again, we're not going to stamp out anti-Semitism. Now that anti-Semitism is out of the box, it's almost inconceivable that it can be stuffed back in again. When you find anti-Semitic acts in your own communities, this I did say 2 years ago, and I still believe in it. This was always the line that we took at the Wiesenthal Center. Don't ever look away from anti-Semitic actions. If you do and say, well, this is relatively mild, nobody was killed, or it's only vandalism, or it's probably just an isolated passerby, don't do that. Because once you raise the bar of what people are supposed to respond, the bar keeps going higher and higher. As long as we're in position in our communities to demand of elected officials, demand of them. Again, what's going to happen in New York City is going to be a test case. We need a refuah shlema there. Next, speak with Jewish pride. Jewish pride is something that even those who are wary of us, sorry for interrupting a mid-sentence. I have to tell you, the single biggest group of anti-Semites that I became aware of in the decades that I worked for the center are people who don't realize they are anti-Semites. They don't know that they harbor some kind of a bias, that things that would be acceptable for other people are not acceptable when it comes to Jews. That's where you start to think that this is part of the genetic code of the non-Jewish world. This is the largest group out there. If you told them that, isn't that being somewhat anti-Semitic? And they think, what, that's crazy. I don't have an anti-Semitic bone in my life. But there is this sense of distance and suspicion and hostility. Sometimes even in people who like us. I've been told by some of my evangelical friends, who says, yeah, we got 100 million evangelicals on your side. A lot of them don't like Jews. They like the bracha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Avram and said, those who bless you will be blessed. They want to be part of that bracha, but they don't like Jews. I'd say Southern Baptists are particularly like that. I mean, not every Southern Baptist, but of all the different denominations that are right-wing, they side with Israel. They don't really have very much room for Jews. You've got to, as I started saying, you've got to speak with pride. People who are kind of in the middle, of the subconscious anti-Semites, respect Jewish pride. By now you've heard the stories of the hostages. And one of them, I forgot who it was, he'll tell me, who was one of the women, who demanded a siddur. Demanded a siddur. And not only did she get a siddur, but it was a high-ranking Hamas commander who came to give her the siddur. Because they respect, especially people who are religious, they respect that kind of tenacity. Bar Cooperstein's mother was called, when he was a hostage, was called by somebody in Hamas who says, I'm standing here with your son. Be a good idea if you would go to The Hague next week with some of the people who are protesting, and you got there as well. Be a good idea for your son if you did that. And what was her response? Said, I'm not afraid of you. You have no control over me at all. HaKadosh Baruch Hu controls me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is my only boss. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the only one who controls my destiny. And yours too. And the guy said, "Madam, well spoken," and hung up the phone. It's a beautiful story, but it is true that people will respect you more if you have this Jewish pride. I remember decades ago I was asked by, I think, the Israeli tourist office to accompany a group of Christians to Israel. I had never done it before, and so I was a little wary of it. The person who asked me to go said, we had a couple of Reform rabbis ready to do it, but then I realized, what are Reform rabbis going to speak about? The right-wing Christians. We need somebody Orthodox. The person who called me was not Orthodox at all, but she had sense. So I asked for Shmuel Kamenetsky, Shlita. And what he told me was jarring. He said, yeah, you can go, you should go, but don't be mevater an ounce of Jewish pride. Don't give in to things. Don't be okay. You believe this. You believe like Dennis Prager's old line. How we're gonna bring unity to Jews and Christians. You believe in 3 gods. We believe in 1. Why don't we call it 1.5 and split the difference? There is something incompatible between Jews and the rest of the civilization. It's not something dark. There is something there. Jonathan Sachs, and with this I close, said that when non-Jews look at us and they see our survival, when non-Jews look at us, forget about thousands of years of Jewish history, just see what has happened here in the last 2 years. So they settler colonialists, but it doesn't explain the siyata d'shmaya, the nisim, day in and day out. They have to think, or they do think, consciously or subconsciously, maybe there's something protecting them. That's terrifying. I mean, in Iran, after the 12-day war, they said, you know why the Israelis were able to take out all of our air defenses? Because they work with demons. They couldn't explain it, so they got to be demons. The other people who are not into demons so much, there's this terrifying possibility that God somehow protects them. Why is that terrifying? Because if that God is a reality, He may have demands and expectations of me as well. And especially in an age where the individual ego is the center of the universe to so much of the world, that is terrifying. That is reason enough to reject Jews and reject Judaism. Be'ezras Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should take care of all of us, continue to terrify the Goyim. We should continue to have Jewish pride and to not give up on people out there who could be our friends, who are decent people, because there are many, and we need Mashiach. Any questions?
Can I just throw in, I think you forgot an important quote from C.J. Chesterton in the beginning of the 20th century. Antisemitism is hating Jews more than you're supposed to.
I didn't expect that one. Yes?
Thank you so much for being with us.
Pleasure's mine.
You're framing things throughout you frame things in a way of like the genetic code of the non-Jewish world. And I want to give a little pushback because to me, when I look at anti-Semitism, forget anti-Semitism. To me, anti-Semitism is a manifestation of Jew hatred. When I look at Jew hatred across the world, it seems to be into the genetic code of the Abrahamic world. And I'm not so, I don't feel so, I felt like it was a bit misplaced talking about Egyptian and Greek anti-Semitism. Well, I don't know if, I feel that it is the case that we were treated similarly to how any of their ethnic subjects were treated. But when I look at Jewish communities in India, when I look at Jewish communities in China prior to communism, which again was not, Chinese communism was not particularly anti-Jewish, but anti-religious, just as well as against Muslims in China. It feels to me like anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, is something that's really in the last 2,000 years, genetically entwined in the code of cultures whose existential right, the right to exist, is founded on the basis of negating the most intimate aspects of our culture. And I secretly, maybe don't tell any of the Rabbeim here, I secretly hope that Egypt should one day return to some non-Islamic polytheism of Egyptian gods, that the Lebanese can be Canaanites again, and that the most holy sacred text of theirs doesn't have quotes or doesn't have hadith saying, the rocks will sing, come behind the tree and kill the Jew. So I wonder to what extent should we, I see Rabbeim like Rabbi Tovia Singer, and he's preaching, Noachidism for non-Jews. And I'm just curious what you think of that. I'm curious what you think the relationship between Abrahamic culture and Jew hatred is.
Okay, so that's two questions. On the first one, I pretty much agree with you, except for I don't hope for a return to paganism. I think that's not just a theoretical issue. I think it's a practical issue. And we don't have time, but I could tell you stories about having to encourage Christians not to drop their Christianity in favor of atheism. There's one Polish intellectual who keeps on calling me. He says, "You're going to get nachas. My daughter just got married in a church." I caught him when he was an atheist. It's a real question. I don't hope for that. As far as whether the DNA of all people has been tainted with this Jew hatred, no, I'm totally on your side there. But I think that is consistent with the idea that the reason for it might be, as some of our Sfarim have said, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has this out there to keep us in line. There were not too many Hasidic communities in Mongolia over the last couple of millennia. So there was no need for the cultural development of anti-Semitism in the East. Although we're getting there in some places. Not in China so much, but in Japan, Korea, it's making its way there. But that you could say is just because they've become more westernized. What the last question was?
Well, I think maybe I didn't communicate clearly enough. I was simply talking about outreach to non-Jews for them to follow Noahide laws.
If you can, then of course that's what we try. That's what we try to
getting
do.
Getting them out of Abrahamic. That's what it means. Getting them out of Christianity.
Noahide doesn't get them out of Abrahamic.
Well,
it can't.
Well, back to proper Abrahamism.
Okay, so that of course is the preferred way of dealing with them. But for every person you get to be a Noahide, there are going to be 100 who are not going to become Noachides, who are intertwined with Christian belief. And what you try to do is get rid of the noxious parts of it, the polytheistic parts of Christianity. And there are just so many Christians like that. When you ask them about the Trinity, they have absolutely no idea what it means, especially Protestants. Catholics have a bit of a theology. Protestants really don't have too much of an active theology. So they are. There's a long talk, and it's a halachic one about whether shituf is asur for them or not. But I can show from Rishonim that whether shituf is asur, shituf means belief in God plus something else. The Rambam says explicitly that atheism is worse than paganism. So for most people, if they're going to...
Only for Jews, I think? Doesn't he only say that for Jews?
No. Decidedly not. No. Next question. Yes?
Sorry. I also have a comment, I guess, that you mentioned a lot of the church fathers as sort of this development of anti-Semitism in Christianity. But my comment would be that it's like maforish in their scriptures, all the things you mentioned. So you mentioned Rabbi Singer already. I'm a big founder of Rabbi Singer's, and something he says is that like any honest Christian who reads their scriptures will arrive at anti-Semitism. And you mentioned supersessionism. That's mephorish in Paul's letters in Galatians that the Israel is the church. If you read the Gospels, explicit in Matthew, it says that the blood guilt of the Jews is like on them for killing Jesus, right? So all of this collective guilt, this is all found directly mephorish in their Bible.
So shtei tshuvas b'davar. Shtei tshuvas b'davar. There are two reactions to that. One is that I think it's somewhat misleading. Why? Because it's like saying that the Quran is anti-Jewish, because there's tons of anti-Semitic stuff in it. It also has tons of philo-Semitic stuff in it.
Yes, but there's a fillet between the Quran and the Christian text.
So what about Romans 9 and 11?
Right. Yes.
That's also Paul.
But I'm saying.
Why is that any?
The main thing that Christians read is the Gospels, right? And the Gospels overwhelmingly portray the Pharisees as these wicked, corrupt,
I don't know.
hypocritical.
Okay, I'm not aware that to Christians the main part of the New Testament is the four Gospels. It hasn't been my experience. Anyway, Galatians isn't one of them. So, anyway, that's one point. The other point is, this is hard to understand once the light bulb goes off in your head, it's such an important realization. When we sometimes, or we have people who try to show that Christianity is stupid and Christianity is full of contradictions, because this is what it says, and therefore anybody living differently from that is being a hypocrite or not true to his faith. It's just not true. Christianity evolves. We, lahavdil, don't evolve. Meaning, what we have in the Torah, we say, is permanent, is fixed, is the Devar Hashem. We don't write new Gemaras. When we find a text that's confusing, we struggle with it and we try to figure out, what does this mean? How am I supposed to understand it? It'd be much easier to say, well, it's a product of its times, and we don't believe in that anymore. Christians have no trouble whatsoever saying, yes, that was the opinion of one of the authors of one of the books of the Bible, and we do not believe that anymore. So it doesn't matter that the texts are full of these references. It matters to people who are ignorant. It matters to people who are not going to have a conversation with a philo-Semitic pastor. It matters when people are looking for a reason to hate. Yes, then to find adequate reason to hate by looking at Christian scripture. But it doesn't have the same kind of impact on a Christian as lahavdil. When we look at Sefer Yehoshua, or people make us look, and we have to try to figure out how are we going to explain this. We don't just say, well, that was back then, and we don't do it anymore. We have to come up with something more serious than that. They don't.
You were going to briefly touch on Islam, and I'm wondering if many people in the Jewish community today harbor the belief that there is an innate anti-Semitism to the Muslim religion. And I'm wondering, in a similar way that it's been touched on about Christianity, I'm wondering if you hold that opinion, or if not, why?
I don't know if I hold that opinion. I don't know enough. I mean, I have Muslim friends, and I've read a bit, quite a bit, actually. To me, the question is somewhat irrelevant in that the dominant forms of Islam today, the dominant forms in the areas of the world that we're most interested in, have a fundamentalist view of texts, and because they have a fundamentalist and a literalist view, they are much more inclined to Jewish hatred. Plus, the culture of so many countries is so anti-Semitic that it doesn't matter whether theoretically there could be a sanitized form of Islam. However, what is the single most populous Muslim country in the world? Indonesia. Indonesia has forms of Islam that are downright moderate and have been for hundreds of years. I've met some of them. Actually, one of the main leaders I once had breakfast at the Waldorf with, and his bodyguards. But they have a genuine view of a moderate Islam, which take the good parts of Islam. There are good parts of Islam, right? They have monotheism that Christians never seem to be able to quite get right. And that does leave room. And I do have that dream. Not that they will become pagans, but they will go back to the Abrahamic sources of Islam and chuck the rest and get rid of the stuff that Muhammad introduced. Yes?
I know people are talking about anti-Semitism rising in America, and there are various indexes for this. What do you find valuable and meaningful to look at as an actual index for rise in Jew hatred? People have been saying, when does it move from, not that it's not significant, but vandalism or isolated incidents to all the way on the other side of the spectrum to Shalom, Jews can't live in America anymore.
I haven't given that much thought. Much of this is experiential, is how it's experienced by people in the street. What is your safety? What is your own feeling of safety and security? A lot of Jews in America, and this hinders Aliyah, just don't get it about people who live here. Objectively, this is not a safe place to live. But you speak to Jews on the street, I feel a lot safer here than I did in the streets of LA. Certainly the streets of New York. Is that based on an objective reality? It's based on my being with my countrymen in my country, where I feel that there are people who have a handle as much as human beings can about who our enemies are and are doing something about it, and the sense of the protection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't feel that in the States, but that doesn't change objectively. But that's sort of like saying, objectively, it is far less safe to get on an airplane than to do skydiving or bungee jumping. The stats there are irrefutable. It makes an afka min halacha about whether you're allowed to do those things. But that doesn't stop. If you try to do it, your mother is not going to be happy, even though she doesn't give you a tough time when you get on a plane. So I don't have any scientific tool that I did have, and now I've forgotten it. I had one thing I created myself, of one thing that I thought would be the absolute dividing line. And I'll try to remember it and send it.
When you tell people to leave.
When I tell people to leave, not 3 years from now, but a year from now. Now I can't.
What do you mean in a year from now?
Right now I can't tell. I can't tell people in good faith that you got to come now. You have to come now. They may have 10 years, then you have 20 years, and you'll like the lobster in the pot. They'll get used to quality of life as far as security changing, but there still should be a point like Kristallnacht in Germany, which was actually too late for most people, but that was an event that there's no gainsaying that I got to get out of here at any cost. We're not close to that yet in the States, but I did have a benchmark that I had, and I'm sorry I'm blanking on it.
Send it over.
I'll send it over when I remember. I'll send it over.
We'll post it when you send it over.
Yeah. Tell me when you're going to throw me out of
You're
here.
doing great. I think it's okay. We've got another few questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, if the Rav has to leave, but it's not.
No, I'm having such a good time.
Maybe someone get the Rabbi. You want a tea or some water? Someone get some water,
thanks.
please. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So it seems like anti-Semitism comes at some stage of some society, right? It comes maybe at the latter part when society's doing really bad. Is this a really bad sign for the U.S.? I know you say like you don't predict the future, but like, is this like a symptom of like a bigger problem that is maybe going to happen in the U.S.? Like,
Not just anti-Jewish.
not just the anti-Jewish. Like, it seems like every society, when anti-Semitism comes, it's not very long until that society just goes into total chaos.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to be a student of anti-Semitism or concerned about Jewish matters. I get both. Thank you. You don't have to be Jewish to see that the West is in chaos, and in so many different ways. In Europe, they've pretty much abandoned even the willingness to do anything to protect themselves, except for a couple of countries in Central Europe, who are helped along by my neighbor Yoram Chazoni, who is their patron saint. But the United States also, what's going on in the United States, you can live with it, but it certainly is a society in chaos. Government is not functioning. The country split worse than ever before. How is it sustainable? I'm hoping it is, but if I don't know who Jimmy the Greek is today. Is Jimmy the Greek still alive? Is he a successor? But if I were Jimmy the
successor, he was a betting guy.
He was the ultimate authority on everything. When anybody wanted to know what are the real possibilities, anything, they went to Jimmy the Greek in Vegas. I don't know if Jimmy the Greek would give odds, such good odds on the United States continuing to function as the United States. But it's the great hope of the Western world. It's not going to be any other country. Scandinavian socialism, which is doing so well, and people are so happy with the quality of life, it's also going down fast. They don't have enough people to sustain it economically, and the migrants are killing it. Yeah.
I'm just curious why you brought Esav's son of Yaakov rather than there's psukim in Kisavo about you won't find any rest, you won't be called, you'll be day and night, you'll be depressed and attacked from all sides, right? So,
right, for a simple reason, because Kisavo is part of the Tochacha, which doesn't describe normal times. It describes special times of Charonav, of Midas Adin. But Esav son of Yaakov is supposed to be all times. I mean, that's the way it's understood or misunderstood, depending on...
So you're saying Kisav, that's not a...
Yeah, that's not... I don't think that Kisav is a description of everyday, constant reality.
Say a person is in an environment that is very dangerously anti-Jewish, and they really want to help in some way, like they just see it on a daily basis and they want to help, but it's too dangerous for them to do it, where people would know that they are Jewish. Is there a way for a person in circumstances like these to, other than prayer, be able to help in some way, or are they just kind of cornered in a sense?
Great question. If you ask me, trying to combat anti-Semitism directly is lower on the list of priorities than helping Jews who are adversely affected by it. So that would be my advice, to try to help those Jews who are getting targeted, who are feeling unsafe, who are feeling insecure, to bump up support for programs that are reaching out to students and to young adults. Pesach Lerner, I know it's a name that means anything to you, but who was running Eretz HaKodesh, Imagine there are a few people in the room who voted for Eretz HaKodesh in the elections. Tells me that he has trouble falling asleep at night, realizing that if the Orthodox world had given him the votes that he wanted, it would have been possible at the WZO meeting this week to have introduced a measure that would have given free tuition to any Jewish child in any school around the world. Now, 99.9% of them would have wound up in Torah schools. But, that's why it could have gotten past the Reform and Conservative delegations as well. They would also have loved the idea. But think of how many neshamas there are out there who could be affected. There are just so many opportunities in every community of whoever knows, as the Gemara talks about, a person who knows one Mishnah should teach a person who knows no Mishnahs. A person who knows 10 teach a person who knows 5. The Jews need a lot of chizuk today. They need a lot of support. Yes?
I just wanted to ask about, I've noticed that sometimes many of the positive things that we do to support the Jewish world have end effects that can sometimes spark more anti-Semitism. So just a couple examples would be assembling political support for the state of Israel. Like you see a lot of people now using AIPAC as a major talking point for Jewish control. So you have like the positive impact of AIPAC, but then you also have the downstream effect of the anti-Semitism. Another example might be trying to combat anti-Semites in the media, and then the downside is that people say that we're censoring them and that you can say anything you want about other people when it comes to the Jews you can't. So I just wanted to ask, how do you view our role in doing hishtadlus that are positive hishtadlus, despite the downstream effects that has?
That's such a hard question. Finding the right level of hishtadlus is always a problem. No one has a great formula that I know of, but then when it gets complicated, when you have to take into account secondary effects and consequences of what you're doing. And we've seen so much of it just in the last couple of years. And these are, hot items in the news to this day. When you leak to the press videos, doctored, maybe not doctored, of abuse of Nukhba terrorists by angry Jewish soldiers, you take into account that the people guarding the hostages are not going to be happy and going to take it out on them. I think that's one of the questions that people are going to ask in the coming trial. When you firmly believe that it's a horrible thing for Jews not to have an opportunity to go up to Har HaBayis, something that I don't do, I imagine most of the Rabbeim don't do, but you can make an argument that it's a necessary sign of our autonomy. You take into account that the likelihood that all it takes is something like that for Al-Arabiya to talk about how the Jews are marching on Al-Aqsa, and 5 people will pick up knives and go after Jews. I think the only thing I can tell you is that you have to look at these things responsibly. Back in my day, one of the big issues was you protest against the Russians for keeping 3 million Jews in prison. And of course the popular thing was to go out and to demonstrate, and Chabad was against it. And Chabad took a lot of heat for it. I don't know if Chabad was right or wrong, but I can tell you that at least the Rebbe showed an immense amount of responsibility by saying part of the issue, part of the weighing of issues has to be what impact this is going to have on Jews who are there. So, as more than that, I could look into my little crystal ball, but the batteries ran out. So it's not.
One last question, take the end.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you basically regarding that attack in Manchester. So
it's more of it's something I have a problem with about the legal system. Basically, the police turned up within about 7 minutes and they shot this guy. All three of them opened fire and they shot one shot into him each. Unfortunately, one of those shots went through the shul door and killed the gentleman inside. So, first of all, my initial thought would be, well, we'd better not try and find out whose shot that was, because at the end of the day, he was innocent. Do you think that people are likely to? Do you think people are likely to try and work out which officer this was and try and prosecute him? And if so, do you think that's justified?
I don't think it's justified. If the police acted responsibly and followed the protocols in their training, no, then it would be a horrible thing to come after them. And we've had so many times in the last 2 years of where we lost soldiers to friendly fire, and it was so tragic. But you saw almost every time family members of the victim would reach out to the person who misfired or made the mistake and said, "We embrace you, we don't hate you, you did what you were supposed to, it was an honest mistake, we don't hold anything against you."
So another thing would be, well, we might not be doing anything to try and cut down this guy, thank God, but in the UK it's going to happen. They're going to try and work out who fired the shot or not. I mean, do you think that it's worth the Jewish community trying to do anything to stop them from letting this guy found out if he was the one that accidentally killed the person?
I think when they ask the Jewish community for their response, which certainly is going to happen, if not anybody official, but in the press, and the press drives so much of what happens then in the legal system, that Jews should say, that's not our way, we don't hold it against them.
As in, what I mean is actively, should we try and do something to try and make sure that this police officer who did try to save the day, should we try and actively do something to make sure that, we just keep...
I think it's a worthwhile thing, but you have to weigh it with the 40,000 other worthwhile things that you have to decide what you're going to allocate your time for. Not.
Okay. Thanks so much, Ron.
Thank
that
you.
Was absolutely amazing.